It's a real pleasure to be here, and I'm delighted to do the introductory remarks before this important panel on supply chain security. I would like to begin and thank the organizer, particularly Nicolas and Jérémie and Marie Dupont. They are wonderful people, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'm very proud to lead the Quebec government's office in Miami. Our team's core mission is to strengthen economic, political, and institutional ties with Florida. There's no better time to be here right now. Let me say one thing to start. Quebec understands the new direction and the new economic policies of the United States. We value the partnership we have. We share your ambitions and priorities, and we are eager to continue to contribute to the growth and success of this great state and of this great nation. In this period of significant geopolitical and technological change, the resilience and strengthening of supply chains are at the forefront of our leaders' decisions. Quebec believes that strengthening the Americas' value chains is essential to address international trade competition. The relationship, and it's true, between Quebec and the United States is quite unique. We have a long and important history of diplomatic and economic relations. In fact, maybe, I'm not sure you know that, but even I discovered that. Quebec has been present in the United States for 85 years, and we have now 9 offices spread across the country. Canada, along with China and Mexico, is among the United States' largest trade partners. Within Canada, Quebec plays a key role with traded goods totaling $133 billion in 2024. As you know, most of you know for sure, our supply chains are fully integrated. For example, Quebec is the world's leading exporter of aluminum and a major supplier of steel and wood, materials commonly used in American buildings and infrastructure. Of course, Quebec has also developed very strong relationships with several US states, among them Florida, with which Quebecers enjoy a truly special bond. The Sunshine State is a key partner for Quebec, not only in trading goods, but also in terms of tourism spendings, which is more than $2.5 billion per year, and that includes capital investment. Several strategic economic sectors for the new global economy are at work in the Quebec-Florida relationship. One big example is in defense. Quebec is an ally and supplier of choice in the defense sector, especially at this critical time when the United States has major defense ambitions. I'll give you some examples. In the aerospace sector, for instance, Montreal is the world's 3rd largest hub, home to major players such as Boeing, Airbus, Bombardier, CAE, and Pratt & Whitney. There are over 230 companies operating in the aerospace supply chain in Quebec. We are the United States' first international supplier of aircraft, first international supplier for flight simulators, and second for turbojets. Bombardier and CAE are prime employers in Florida. Quebec is also a leader in the maritime sector. We prioritize bringing shipbuilding and icebreaker to North America to strengthen our security. Thanks to increased investment by the Canadian government in military and civilian fleets, our shipbuilding industry is booming. Several Quebec equipment manufacturers sell their systems to the Army, the Navy, and Air Force. In addition to all those industries, Quebec has the most diverse mineral resources in Canada. We're a reliable supplier of critical minerals that are essential for producing advanced military technologies and defense and communications equipment. Quebec has the potential to produce 25 minerals that the US Department of Energy considers critical. Our historical expertise in the mining sector, coupled with our geographical proximity and an extensive cross-border transport infrastructure network, makes us the preferred partner for countries looking to reduce their reliance on partners that engage in unfair practices. I will end as I started. Quebec understands the United States' desire to strengthen its strategic industries. And in the modern context, where societies are rethinking their supply chains and its industrial policy, Quebec is an ally you can really count on. Thank you very much and have a nice day.
All right, thank you, Catherine, for setting the stage for this conversation. We are about to go deeper on right now on the realignment. So kicking off and moderating our conversation here is Abby Lindberg, who is the president and CEO of Capital Analytics Associates, and she will introduce you all to all of the panelists participating. Please welcome Abby to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing this morning? It is so wonderful to be here. I actually drove only 15 minutes. I live here in Miami, but I know a lot of you are visiting, so welcome to Miami. I am extremely excited to be moderating this panel. And to give you a little bit of an idea, my name again is Abby Lindenberg. I'm the president and founder of CAA, and we do annual business reviews on different US cities. So a 200-page sector-by-sector breakdown of what it would be like to do business in the different markets that we cover. We cover 18 markets right now in the United States, and it has been fascinating to watch the past couple of years how affected they are by global trade, global disruptions, everything that will be discussing today. So I am just thrilled to be here. I am very grateful to have all of my panelists that will be giving us profound insights into this discussion. I would also like to thank the World Strategic Forum and the International Economic Forum of the Americas for inviting me to host. And to kick it off, we are going to be talking about the realignment, global trade, reshoring, and supply chain security. Over the past decade, the global trading system has undergone profound realignment. Rising geopolitical tensions, pandemic-infused disruptions, and a new era of strategic industrial policy have prompted a fundamental rethinking of supply chain dependencies. Joining me today, I have, to my right, Brian Colton, the chief economist of Fitch Ratings, followed Goldie Hyder, the CEO of Canadian Business Council. Then next, Lisa Gordon-Haggerty, the CEO of Latour Partners. Then Robert Gramming, the chair and CEO of Holland & Knight. And Bernard Spitz, the president of BSC. Let's give him a round of applause. I'd like to start by asking my panelists one question for everyone to answer. How would you describe the current realignment of global trade? And are we witnessing a renationalization of supply chains or the birth of a new global trading order altogether? Brian, you're to my right. You get to be in the hot seat and answer first.
Thanks, Abby. Yeah, it's definitely a time of major change. I'm not so sure I would characterize it as a complete realignment, complete rewriting of the global trade order. I think everybody's got to face higher taxes when they trade with the United States. I think that seems to be a permanent feature. But is that going to fundamentally change what we look at when we see global trade flows? I'm not so sure. And the reason is, I think some of the factors that drive the US large current account deficit are very deep macroeconomic factors. The gap between savings and investment. The US has a relatively low saving ratio, invests a lot, just consumes more than it produces. And that means that unless we get some fundamental changes in the structure of demand, at the moment that gap is being driven by the fiscal deficit, which remains very large. I don't think we're going to see the US current account deficit disappear. On the other side, China is actually, if anything, doubling down now on its export-led growth model. They've got real problems with domestic demand. It's very, very weak. They're trying to offset that with fiscal easing, but they're kind of pushing this industrial policy even harder. They've actually managed to keep their export growth very strong, even though exports to the US have slowed down. I think it's very hard to see China not remaining kind of dominant in the global manufacturing supply chain. So where does that leave things? Yeah, you know, there's a risk that as China looks for other markets for its exports, you know, it pushes more and more stuff into the rest of the world, and that's a challenge. So. You know, I think we've got to be looking at a more complicated global trade picture. The supply chains are going to get longer, but still, ultimately, China's going to be the major producer, in the US, the major consumer. I don't see that moving, but China's going to be redirecting trade through other countries, probably going to be investing more in the rest of the world so that it could produce more outside China, but Chinese companies. But I don't see a fundamental shift, I think, in the way the pattern of global trade ultimately looks at these big deficits in the US, big surpluses in China. I think those are still going to be there.
Absolutely. Goldie, how about from the Canadian perspective?
So I would add to what Brian has said by saying that America is changing, and a few things are happening. First of all, agree, tariffs are here and they're not going to go away, and it doesn't matter if it's Republicans or Democrats. It's basically a VAT on imports into America. They need the revenue. This is a way of getting revenue through the back door rather than being honest with people, which is we're living beyond our means. We spent too much money. We probably need a consumption tax, not a winner in a political campaign. So we won't tell anybody that. Instead, we'll try and convince them that other countries are paying it, but we all know who's actually paying it. Second point, security is now a lens and has been for some time, but it's becoming even more amplified, and it's around certain things. Whether we agree or disagree, it's steel, it's lumber, it's autos, it's pharmaceuticals, and it's supply metals. And on those issues, the president, or any president, does have authority through Section 232 and a couple of other sections that an American administration can continue to impose significantly strong tariffs as a way in which to provide security for their defense industry, for their economic and national security, and the obvious global alignment and realignment that's taking place and the battle that continues with China. And it's the first time America or anyone has actually faced an adversary, if you want to call them that, that is not only an economic superpower, but is also, has military capabilities and has technology capabilities. And so that triage makes China quite the competitor. And so America's trying to figure all of that out. So we have to be very conscious that those two things probably don't change whether there's a Republican in the White House or a Democrat in the White House. On the broader question of trade, I think that's the real quagmire that we all find ourselves in, because what's never going to change is the consumer desire for the best product at the cheapest price. And as long as we want that, it'll be very hard to make domestically a lot of the things that we've become used to that are being made in other parts of the world. So I think we have to be cognizant of the importance that trade will play, the integrity of supply chains will play. I continue to believe that trading arrangements will be important to America, including, I hope, the review and renewal of the USMCA here, right here in North America.
Lisa?
Great. Well, thank you, everybody, and good morning. So I have some great straight men to my left here. I'd like to pull back just even a step.
And Lisa, could you hold your...
I'm sorry. I'd like to step back even a little bit higher at maybe the 20,000-foot level. You know, we often hear about great trade, great competition. Everybody looks at that and they think militaristically that's the way we're looking at our competition, if you will. In my case, I consider China an adversary. But it absolutely applies at this point in time. This is really an inflection point in which we find ourselves. The United States, her allies, her partners, and like-minded nations, we believe that we have to maintain our liberal world order, being free markets, economies, human rights, because otherwise we'll be at the beck and call of our adversaries, being Xi and Putin. They've made it very clear. Xi has made it clear in his 2050 statement in the 2017 conference that he's looking for a new world order, a reordered communist world by 2050. And we either have to decide as like-minded nations that we are going to either accept that or we're going to continue to play into this free market economy. And that's really where we are right now. But I believe the world has woken up and we really understand what we are facing now, especially with the supply chain crisis. It's resolved, it's strengthened our alliances. We've built new partnerships, private investments will put us back on course. But the reality is, this is an economic, energy, and national security crisis. And it did not occur overnight, and it will not be resolved quickly. So we must commit to the long game and it's more imperative than ever that we do it. And we start with the supply chain and the supply chain challenges that we have. But again, it also transcends so many other areas of importance. And so I think we can learn and we can take advantage of the situation in which we find ourselves now and not only apply it to the supply chain issues that we're encountering, but in other areas. So thank you.
And Bob?
I believe that we're in a moderate, right now, phase of reorganization. Specifically, I think that along political lines and regional lines, we're seeing global trade shift. I think that that will continue for quite a while. I think that that's going to be a long-term trend. I will say, though, that that could change dramatically because of geopolitical issues at just about any time now could really force a radical change, I think, in it. And the other point is the card that's floating out there overlays everything we're talking about is technology, whether it's quantum computing or other technology, and the changes that that will bring about, because I do think that that will also shift trading patterns, because I think technological developments are going to explode, especially once quantum computing gets fully utilized by companies. And how that will change trading patterns and how that will change other behaviors is anybody's guess at this point.
Bernard?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everybody. When we are talking about a new global order, it is clear that there is a new global order, but this new global order is not only based on economics or in business. As it previously said, we also are in a moment of global new order in terms of defense, in terms of individual strategies. And I think that this has started before Trump election. I was impressed, and I think, Goldie, we were together 2 years ago in India. You were representing the Canadian business, I was representing the French business, and we heard the speech of Modi, Prime Minister of India. And that was very strange, because after a political internal pro domo explanation, it was just before election, his speech was in two parts. The first part was about power, and there was a word polite for the United States, there was a word aggressive for China, and there was no word at all for Europe. We were not existing. We disappeared on the planet in this perspective. Then the second part of the speech was about business. And then he was very welcoming all the European, and I would say Western in general, but I'm talking for Europe, European technology, because he was recognizing the strengths and maybe in many sectors, the leadership of European companies. And of course, he wanted them to attract them and share the technology, etc. But I think that this has never been so clear, the difference between what power means in 2025. There is the strengths and the part, and there is the business part. And this, of course, they are combined. But without the first one, you don't exist. And this is something, it's a lesson. When this being said, when we talk about in terms of trade, we in Europe have an incredibly asymmetric situation. We have a surplus of 200 billion Europe, respect to the US, and we have a deficit of 300 billion with China. And so, of course, across these global macroeconomics figures, when you go into the details of the sectors of field, you have a lot of different situations that we will go into this later. Just the last point about Europe. When we compare Europe with the US or with China, we are not comparing the same thing. You have one country in China with, I would say, with one party, which makes things easier. You have one country in the US, even if it's a federal system. You have 27 countries in Europe, with the European Commission is pushed by a lot of rules which come at a certain point become negative. We are in the middle of a complete revision of that. But when some months ago you were mentioning the idea of having a European champion, you were sure that you would be condemned because that was bad. To be a champion in Europe was considered as bad because it was a danger for competition within the European Union, without taking in consideration that we are dwarfs as compared with the huge company in the world, and most of our business. And the second thing is the lack of coherence. You all have been aware of the Draghi report, and the Draghi report made very clear what we have to do, except that we have not done it, and we are not close to do it, because of this lack of integration, especially in the financial system, between the countries. We try to understand that. We are making some efforts. I could talk about that later, but we are far from reaching this point. So in this new global order, we have our real difficulties in terms of speed of adaptation.
Thank you. In an environment of raising tariffs, industrial subsidies, and geopolitical tensions, how can companies and governments strike the right balance between open markets and national resilience? Brian, I'll start again with you.
Yeah, I think here there's kind of a risk of sort of fighting the last battle. You know, we'll kind of look back to the pandemic and these supply chain problems that we had during the pandemic, but it's a bit of a unique episode, but it comes up a lot in this debate about we need to improve supply chain resilience. It's always in there in terms of the justification for why this all needs to change. But actually, if you think about the way supply chains responded in the pandemic, it was pretty impressive, actually, because what happened was governments around the world were shutting down production facilities and ports and trading facilities. That's not going to happen very often, but so that was a one-off. At the same time, you had this massive, absolutely massive fiscal stimulus in the United States, but also in Europe, at a time when people couldn't go out and consume services. So you had a completely off-the-scale increase in demand for goods. And we know what had happened in the previous 20 years was that the supply of goods had become increasingly internationally vertically integrated. But the way those supply chains were built was based on an expectation that global goods demand would be growing 0.5%, 1% a year. I mean, as we get richer, we buy more services generally, then that was what was going on. So they were geared to this sort of gradual, slow increase. And then in 18 months, we had a 30% increase in the volume of US goods demand. Now, that is an amazing increase in demand, and actually, I think the supply chains responded very well. So we shouldn't forget that the international trading system, international merchandise trading, is a pretty flexible network. And think about supplies of medical equipment to the West through the pandemic. We would have been much more vulnerable without global trade. And in the UK, I mean, we tried to make it ourselves. It was a shambles, basically. They were making vaccines in pig farms, and I mean, it was just ridiculous. The attempt to try and produce this equipment domestically quickly. So, you know, you don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater here, right? So, you know, clearly for these strategic industries that we've spoken about, semiconductors, steel, energy. You know, things are going to change there, but is it really going to make you more resilient if you don't trade with companies around the world that produce stuff in different countries and are able to? They're pretty flexible, I don't know. I think governments need to be a bit careful about how much they put sand in the wheels of the global trading system.
Fair point. Goldie?
So the answer to your question from my perspective is businesses should hedge. It's on the one hand, supply chains are changing, and it's a shame because the best lessons of COVID are being abandoned. You could never have resolved the issues around COVID if it wasn't for us working together, right from the vaccine, to the execution of keeping everybody safe and everything. But that's gone now, and now we're in a new world. So I would hedge. On the one hand, clearly things on security, as I've mentioned earlier, all related to national security, are going to. They don't call it friendshoring or nearshoring anymore. That was, I guess, a Democratic term. But really, what's in place is very much the same thing. Is we're going to make sure that we have access to the things that are critical to our well-being. Now, the good news for Canada is we have a lot of the things that the world needs. It's either with us or it's with Russia in many cases. So we have tremendous things to offer when it comes to that security element, particularly around critical minerals, rare earths, potash, uranium, oil, gas. The list goes on and on and on. So we can be a part of that supply chain. But the hedge comes in realizing that not everybody's attached to the United States of America. There's a whole world out there, as Bernard reminded us, whether it's in Europe or it's in Asia, that's thinking differently. And what they're thinking about is saying, look, if America is changing, and America has every right to change, and it is embarking on an industrial policy that is more isolationist and more based on its belief that it can go more on its own, fine. But there are many of us who, A, cannot do that, and B, don't believe that's the right thing to do, that still can construct some form of trade architecture, supply chain integrity. Our Prime Minister has been talking about Europe and Asia, trying to find more integrity in supply chains. It's not a short-term game, it's a long-term game. It's not a replacement, it's an and, not an or. So that's why I think the answer is hedge.
Very good. Lisa?
Great. Well, thank you. I agree mostly with what you said, Goli, but I would also bring it back to the United States. By my 30-plus years in and out of federal service, one of the things that there's a stark reality with the United States and the United States government. This isn't just about an administration. It's about our Congress, and it's about the appropriations and the long-term strategies that are put together. So while we are all envisaging this phenomenal growth, if you will, spurred of both private investment, public-private partnerships, we also have challenges to ensure that it is executed by Congress, that the appropriations are there so that the government, the amount of monies that the government should be providing will also be able to be shored up and be a long-term prospect. But I'd also like to say that I think there are relationships that, while there have been tensions in the past, whether it's with the United States and Canada or with the EU and what have you, I think we are seeing some strengthened alliances going on. And we're in the early stages of that. And I think we can only work to try to improve those, whether we're looking at friendshoring, onshoring, offshoring, we're looking for partnerships, we're looking for multilateral strategies. I think we should all do our best to work to resolve issues or misunderstandings perhaps, or whether there are statements that have been made. We need to move as a community of like-minded entities, whether it's the private partnerships, whether it's public partnerships, whether it's international agreements, multilateral agreements. So I look to this as a little bit more positive, that I think we've all woken up to the realization we have supply chain crises, and we need to work together as a foundation.
Bob?
When we look to our client base and see what our clients are doing, it occurs to me one of the crucial things that has to be done in this situation is active engagement with government. We see that certainly in the U.S. We also see it with our Mexican clients in Mexico. Active engagement with the government during times of this significant change in trade is very important. The governments tend to enunciate broad guidelines, but the actual implementation of those guidelines is subject to a lot of discretion by the folks that are actually at the point in creating these regulations and also interpretation of those relations. And so it could be overlooked. People can throw their hands up and think that, oh, well, some announcement's been made on a tariff, but how that tariff gets applied and what classification your product ends up in is, in many cases, subject to a lot of negotiations and discussions. And mostly governments are very willing to have those discussions. And it's surprising how you can get successful results in engaging in those discussions.
Great. Bernard.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think COVID was clearly a shock for everyone because a lot of, not only in the business, but just everybody realized that some products were missing just because we were completely based on production in China, for instance, for really when you were looking at it for a very cheap difference. So the question was, what is the price of sovereignty? And I think that since that, there has been a re-evaluation of the price of sovereignty in major productions. So that was the first thing. The second thing is the adaptation of companies. And, you know, before Trump tariffs, I have the figure that European multinationals increased their US capital expenditure by 35% between 2022 and 2024. So it was already a move because it was a positive move in terms of where is the growth. The growth is in the US, so the company go to look for the growth. Now, since Trump's election, you still have a movement to the US, but in a very different perspective. It's just more defensive one, like to be allowed to do this. And final point, I mean, I am not I agree with you in terms of to take care of the governments, of course. I mean, if you don't take care of them, but there is a risk now to confuse the political visions, which are short-termist, and the business logic. And you know, when you look at what is going on in many countries, not only in Europe, but with a movement of protectionism, sovereignty, etc., etc., I think that there is a frontier to be to respect between the two. Otherwise, the business is going to be the hostage of internal goals, which have nothing to be seen with growth and with innovation and with future. People do not like innovation in politics because it changed the rules of the game and it changed their rules of their game. So I think that here we have a risk.
I'd like to drill down a little bit and ask everyone some individual questions. And Bob, if you don't mind, I'll start with you. You had alluded to that Holland & Knight is a legal and corporate advisor to multinational companies. What new regulatory and compliance challenges are businesses facing as they adapt to shifting trade frameworks and industrial policies? And how are firms rethinking governance and risk management in this environment?
A couple of points. I think one way, let's focus on the U.S. Initially. If you look at the current administration, you can look at it at what they're doing with a certain lens. I think you can look at it, they're looking to address abuses and unfair practices in the trade world. 2, they're willing to use tariffs as leverage in unrelated situations. And 3, the administration really wants to promote domestic U.S. manufacturing, particularly in strategic industries. With that in mind, you also have to keep in mind that the U.S. administration now is using increasingly what we call Section 232, which relates to national defense and the Trade Expansion Act, and also Section 301, which deals with unfair and discriminatory practices. Now, those can be implemented with very little notice, and they can have significant impacts on companies. I think the key to remember in this situation is, again, it's really engagement that you have to have with the administration. The administration there's a lot of very responsive folks in the administration. They want to be constructive. They want to help business. And again, there's many tools that they can use to help you, but you have to engage with them. And our clients are doing that all the time. And if you're not engaging with the administration on these issues, I can guarantee you your competitors are. And we see that all the time. Taking it on to the corporate level, from the board of directors standpoint, I think we increasingly see these tariff issues in the relevant companies rising to the board level, and many companies have risk committees that they're considering it in their risk committees. If they're not considering it in their risk committees, they're certainly considering it in their audit committees. And so we see a great deal more reports being made to the board on a regular basis. And I can also guarantee you that the CEOs of these companies are very much on top of these issues. And they're very conversant on these trade issues and technical elements of the trade issues, because that's a fundamental part of their job now. And so we see that across the board, and see a lot of engagement on these issues.
Goldie, how is Canada positioning itself within the new industrial geography, particularly between the U.S. and the Indo-Pacific partners, to attract investment and strengthen supply chain security while maintaining competitiveness?
Well, as I mentioned, there's a lot of change happening, but one thing that's not going to change is geography. And we're a country that there's no other country in the world that wouldn't change places with Canada right now. We're that lucky. The problem is that luck has sometimes created some complacency to us, so as much as it surprises people, I often thank the president for really waking up a sleeping giant. We have a country that is blessed with all the resources that I rattled off earlier, and the list is longer if I went across the rest of the country. But we've been really limited by our own doing. You cannot begrudge America for this. We've done it to ourselves by having an over-reliance on trade with a single customer. And I often say even an 8-year-old with a lemonade stand knows one customer is not good. You need more than one. And so this is not something that's a result of Donald Trump or this election or this administration. We've been trying to diversify for some time now. The good news is there's a mobilization and a realization of how important it is from a sovereignty perspective, economic sovereignty in particular, to ensure that we accelerate that diversification. And there's much debate about where to look. With all due respect to Bernard, our Prime Minister talks a lot about Europe. I think most people will tell you the growth is in Asia. There's a lot of geopolitical reasons to be with Europe. There's security reasons to be with Europe. But actual growth is going to be happening particularly in Asia. Not to suggest that it's not in Africa or in Latin America, but today, anybody who'd bet on something would bet on Asia, simply because the middle class there is growing dramatically, and it's a very young population today, except for China, which has other issues. So you've got a tremendous opportunity. Canada, multicultural country, pro-immigration country, a lot of lineage and diaspora that allows you to connect through that. And so our message to Canadians has been, it's not a minus U.S. strategy, it's a U.S. plus strategy. No one in their right mind, we would never short America. America's economy is pretty resilient, as we're seeing right now. We're very fortunate to have the rule of law and the relationships, and yes, a trade agreement. We can dispute the deficits because most of us feel there is no deficit. But nevertheless, we're gonna get through that period, and I continue to believe that we can get a review and renewal of the USMCA. If it doesn't happen tomorrow, it'll happen the day after. If it doesn't happen the day after, it'll happen the day after that. But it will come. So we've got to figure out a way to do both. Stabilize the relationship with the United States of America when you have 25% of your GDP is in trade and 75% of it is one country, United States, and the second place is at 3%. Right? It's a big gap. You're not going to be able to diversify that fast. So you have to do that while continuing the importance of creating more markets for your goods that allows investment to come. And let me just close by connecting these two pieces together, because what I hear when I travel around the world is we will invest in Canada, but we're going to wait and see what happens with the USMCA first. Because of course it's going to be a conduit to a market larger than 40 million when you can get access to another 460 million people in the rest of the trade agreement that we have. So they're very much connected.
And Lisa, given your experience at the intersection of energy and national security. How should governments and industries integrate supply chain resilience into broader security and energy strategies? And are current policies keeping pace with the risks that you see emerging?
Well, first of all, we have to, again, stand back and take a look at where we were, where we've been, and where we're going. And really, the United States, at least in my experience in the government and in private sector over the last 30+ years, has been that we allowed basically the entire defense industrial complex and national security complex, which includes the energy complex, if you will, to fall in its face. We allowed material supplies to basically evaporate. We allowed the defense industrial base basically to turn into, if you will, a ghost of its former self. We've got one major place to conduct submarine support, and where we're supposed to be, for example, and I'll use this as a perfect example because I think everybody will resonate with this because it affects the AUKUS agreement, it affects the United States. We're supposed to be building at least 2 fast attack submarines here in the United States. We are about a year and a half behind, at least, and I'm being kind here. We can't even build 1.5 on an annual basis. So what I'm saying is we've got single points of failure throughout the entire defense industrial complex. And what we need to do is work to shore that up, to find places where we have these single points of failure, whether it's in energy resiliency, whether it's in the defense industrial complex. When you look at the front end of the nuclear fuel cycle, there are single points of failure along those lines. We look to our friends in Canada to help us support in enrichment in other areas. So it transcends all of those different areas. We've allowed different capabilities to basically evaporate or sell the technologies to adversaries. In this case, 60% of the critical materials in the world are held by, the processed materials are held by China, and 90% of them are processed in China. We need to do a better job in that case. We look at EVs, we look at what it takes for rare earth elements to affect all of the different areas in energy security and national security. And so we've got a very tough road ahead of us. But I think this administration and previous administrations have recognized this. They've been slow to act, but I think with the private sector coming into play into this and some great public-private partnerships, I think we're well on our way to reestablishing, reconstituting, and recapitalizing our defense industrial and our energy and national security basis. But again, we have a long road to go. Let me finally say that this isn't just about the United States, though. It's about our friends. It's about our allies. It's about our partners. It's about those with whom we share common interests. It's the special relationship with the UK, with France, with other nuclear states, with the EU, with NATO, with our allies, with, of course, Canada, with the entire Western Hemisphere. We have to do this together. There's strength in numbers. No one can go it alone, and we need to continue that. We also need to build up that resilience because this crisis that we're encountering today, there will be another crisis that we have yet to foresee, and it was like where we were in 2019 with the pandemic. We were reactive. We need to be more proactive in the future. We need to really anticipate what those next over-the-horizon threats are so that we can get ahead of them. We may not be able to accomplish everything it takes to get ahead of it, but what we will do is, at least with eyes wide open, we'll be able to consider how we can resolve that with the resiliency necessary with multilateral agreements and partners.
Wonderful. And Brian, from a macroeconomic standpoint, how are global monetary conditions and fiscal interventions reshaping trade and investment flows? And what does Fitch's outlook suggest about which regions stand to gain or lose most in the realignment of global supply chains?
Tabby, maybe I could take the second one first in terms of the sort of winners or losers question from all this. To some extent, I think there aren't many winners because you construct barriers to trade. There's just a cost across the board, so it's not even a zero-sum game. So I'd start with that. But I guess you know, one observation is that the benefits to Mexico and Canada of the USMCA in relative terms have actually increased through this, because before the trade war, before this year, the United States effective tariff on Canada and Mexico was somewhere between 0 and 0.5%, and the tariff on the rest of the world was about 2%. So the gap was about 1.5%. Now we've got, our estimate is that the effective tariff rate, the US globally, is about 14%. But for Canada and Mexico, it's only about 5 or 6%, because so much trade is not tariffed at all through USMCA. So the relative advantages, and it's amazing. Go around the world, speak to a lot of governments. It's amazing when he talks about tariffs. It's not the absolute level of tariff. There's this sort of resignation that everybody's facing this tax, as Goldie's called it, on exports to the US. But is the tariff rate I'm facing worse, you know, lower or higher than the guy that I'm competing with? And so in that sense, Mexico and Canada, I think, have got a relative advantage. The regions I worry about are Europe, because China's going to be looking for a market for these exports. It's going to be harder to sell us into the US, and they're going to be pushing that output into Europe. One thing that's happened this year as the dollar has weakened is that actually China's competitiveness globally has improved a lot with that, because effectively they're still pegging their currency to the dollar pretty closely, so they become a lot more competitive. And this is an issue. Look at the German economy. It hasn't grown for 3 years. For previous 10, 15 years before the pandemic, Germany was doing very, very well out of its relationship with China, right? China was importing lots of capital goods from Germany. That was supporting German export growth. But now what's going on is that China has developed that capacity domestically, doesn't need the German capital goods imports, doesn't need the German auto imports. They've got huge capacity in their domestic. So they're no longer buying German stuff, but they're also now selling stuff to the rest of the world that the Germans used to. So every day I walk down my street, there's a new Chinese electric car sitting there, brand new. I mean, that they really are. So I think Europe is definitely vulnerable to sort of deflationary forces coming from a surge in imports from China, which I think we're going to see in the next couple of years. And then when you think about East Asia and the whole manufacturing complex out there, I know those economies are growing rapidly, but if you think ultimately what's going on, a lot of that manufacturing export capacity, that whole manufacturing kind of hub that's in East Asia, a lot of it is geared to supplying the US consumer ultimately. You know, it's part of that supply, that global supply. So how do those countries navigate this tricky situation where China's invested a lot of in their country? They're selling a lot to China as well, but now we've got this tension between China and the US, and they're stuck right in the middle of it. So Vietnam, I think, is the poster child. You know, through the US-China trade war under the first Trump administration, there's a huge amount of redirection, but that's not going to be so easy this time. So that region has got some real challenges in terms of coping with this geopolitical environment that we're now in.
And Bernard, how is the European private sector adapting to rising geopolitical fragmentation, U.S.-China strategic rivalry, and the resurgence of industrial policy worldwide? And in particular, do you see Europe succeeding in building the secure and competitive supply chain it needs? Or are regulatory complexities and divergent national approaches hindering its ability to compete in this new global order? Just a simple question for you.
Well, you know, things are never black and or white, and we are in a gray area of navigation, as was previously. We support a big fragmentation. It is clear. And we have also, there are two consequences on that. One is sector by sector. The situation is is full of contrast. So if you just take the example of the clean air and the clean energy, we are completely dependent on solar panels from China, 98%. But we are world leaders in the wind energy and also nuclear. One page of advertising for the French nuclear. And this is one example among others. We are very strong in many industries. And when we join our efforts, like Airbus, you see that we have great results worldwide. So nothing is lost, but we suffer from this fragmentation. We suffer financially speaking. It is clear that, and that was one of the conclusions of the Draghi's report, that Europe invests 2 percentage points of GDP less than the US every year. So, I mean, at the end of the cycle, it makes a huge difference. It explains why we are late in terms of tech, in terms of green, in terms of defense, and many others. So, how could we deal with that? Well, the answer is simple. It's the Capital Markets Union. Because today, what's going on is that the savings by the Italians, the French, the German, whatever, these are placed into asset management who place that in the US. And with that money, the US purchase European companies. That's what's going on since decades. And it's absurd. But to fight that, the answer is to unify the market. But we don't go through it because the countries have their own ambition. We also need the consolidation of the banking system to be at the size of the big players in the world. And you see what's going on. The German applauds the idea of the report, but when an Italian bank, UniCredit, wants to buy a Commerzbank, a German bank, the Deutsche Commerzbank, the government, you know, the one that you want to listen to, say, oh, no, that's impossible. And why is it impossible? It's impossible because we don't want it, okay? So if we go in this kind of situation, we go to nowhere. And there is no, so at the Commission level, there is a beginning of reshuffle. And it is clear that, to my opinion, that the Commission will condemn the German government as it condemned the Italian government for being too intrusive and opposing the market by forbidding an Italian bank, UniCredit, to purchase another Italian bank in the name of something which is called the Golden Power. The Golden Power is, again, a tool by the governments to oppose to some operations. So the common idea was to use that, and this is perfectly understandable in defense, in some strategic things, because you don't want some strategic technology belong to other countries and eventually not friend. But when you are talking about business within the country and which has nothing to be seen with defense or with this, I mean, it shows that the governments, when they have a tool, they want to use it, and they don't use it necessarily in the right direction. So the solution to be in Europe would be to allow a two-speed Europe, because it's not true that Germany is equal to Hungary. It's not true that France is equal to Estonia. You know, it's like in animals farm. Everybody is equal, but some are more equal than others. And if you can have at least a group of countries, the biggest ones, which can make a decision without being under the dependence of the unanimity clause, which stops all initiatives, then we could have a Europe which could be able to act as a global player. And I think that we are moving in the good direction. Apart from that, in many sectors you have different situations. In some we are acting well. In some we are into difficulties. But this would be this need another discussion. And just to conclude with the so-called industrial policy, everybody is complaining about the lack of industry. And it's true, because in Europe and in other countries, we have had the concept of industry without factories. You know, that was a fashion thing, which is completely crazy. And it's also destroying the social society, the social body, because, and with the arrival, the stronger of if not the quantum that we mentioned previously, there is a potential of destruction of what makes a society. And I think this is the social danger is maybe more stronger than the economic danger.
Well, we're close to time, and I'd like to ask all my panelists one last closing question using the 5-minute remainder. So rapid speed. Looking ahead for 2026, what is one of the big disruptors that are on your mind, or what is one of the one big worries that is on your mind that you are preparing for or would suggest that policymakers prepare for? Brian, I'll start with you.
No surprises here. The state of public finances in some of the world's biggest economies. You know, the market's been focused this year on the growth of private credit, you know, how impressive this is, you know, and we're talking about an outstanding stock of private credit of $2.5 trillion, right? Between them, the United States and the Chinese government in 2025 borrowed $4 trillion, right? 4% of world GDP on our measure. That's a massive boost. That's flowing in one year. At some point, the market's going to get concerned about this, and a lot of what we're talking about, this need for the supply chain security, improving the military-industrial nexus, that's going to have a burden on the public finance, right? I mean, and the U.S. government is spending, I think the federal government spends more on interest than military. So this fiscal issue, you know, and nobody quite knows when the market is going to get worried about this. We've seen it in the UK, the market getting very worried about it caused a crisis in 2022. We got pressures in France from the market on the OAT spreads, US, UK, France looking, this is a worry.
Goldie?
I can be very brief. Ditto. It's exactly what's on our minds. It's the rising debt. We're living well beyond our means. In Canada, we spend more on interest on our debt than we do on healthcare, which is still the #1 issue in the minds of Canadians. So we've got to get the math right, and if we don't, there's a slippery slope at the other end.
Lisa?
Great. As a scientist, I don't have to talk about the macroeconomics, so I'd stay away from that. But what I guess I'm concerned about in the near term is that we don't show commitment to remain resolved in this long-term issue. We have to come together. We have to do this. The other thing we do that concerns me greatly, and I neglected to mention it before, is looking at the workforce of the future. That's something that we really, you know, we talk about having the best facilities, the best construction programs, so on and so forth. You know, AI, despite what Elon Musk says that there's going to be no need for humans in the next 10 to 20 years, I believe we really need to look at how we also attain and maintain the workforce of the future, because it is about humans. It is about make sure, and it's not that we need everybody to be a postdoc physicist or an engineer or quantum physicist, but we also need the technician level. So we need to look across the entire scope of the workforce to make sure that as we introduce the state-of-the-art technologies, these new manufacturing hubs, we actually have a workforce that can execute the missions that we're undertaking. Thank you.
And Bob?
I think the greatest threat really that we're going to start seeing more and more in 2026 is the displacement effect that the technology is going to have on the white-collar workforce. I think that is something that most governments are not focused on at all, and that has a potential for just massive change, and with all sorts of social consequences, which will then be followed by the blue-collar disruptions too, and that is very serious for the entire Western world and the entire world, I think.
And Bernard?
I agree with all that has been said, so I would just add 2 things. What's going to happen in Ukraine, because what is at stake is the existence of NATO across its Article 5. If it leads to the idea that there is no more real deterrence in Europe, this could destabilize the entire world. And maybe the big event to come is the midterms, with a consequence in all those subjects.
Well, Brian, Goldie, Lisa, Bob, Bernard, thank you so much. We will have to meet again in about 6 months with all of the solutions to all of the challenges we discussed today. But please give my panel a round of applause.